Hi, welcome to Prime Recap. After being taken from his home, a dog named Buck will have to face cold, hunger, and evil humans in order to get in touch with his wildest instincts and survive in the forest. Today we will recap the story of the 2020 movie, The Call of the Wild. In the middle of the Arctic, several legends about large amounts of gold have arisen, which has attracted many adventurous miners. But to get to the far north, the pioneers needed strong, healthy dogs to pull their sleds over the mountains. This started a massive dog abduction throughout the northern hemisphere. Unaware of the risk he is taking, Buck, Judge Miller's dog, walks disastrously around town, interacting with people and running after the letter carrier. However, as he walks the streets, one of these dog-seeking criminals arrives in Santa Clara Valley and sees Buck as the perfect target. After messing around the city, the dog goes home to find the staff preparing Judge Miller's birthday feast, but since they know Buck is a glutton, they hide all the food and put him out. After being kicked out of the mansion, the dog starts chasing a hare around the yard, but the judge thinks he has gone into town and asks his employees to serve the table outdoors. After failing miserably in his hunt, Buck walks back through the yard and soon finds the feast, getting extremely excited. With the food set out, the humans gather at the entrance of the house and prepare to take a picture, but before the camera is even ready, Buck appears with a giant piece of chicken in his mouth, and of course destroys the entire feast. Upset that the dog had spoiled his celebration, Miller puts Buck to sleep in the backyard as a way to punish him, but in the middle of the night, that criminal goes to the house and uses a small ball to lure the dog and trap him inside a box. In the hands of the criminals, Buck travels on his way to the Arctic, trapped in the tiny box without receiving any food or drink, and forced to drink rainwater in order to survive. After a long journey, Buck arrives at a place where he is finally released by a strange-looking man, but soon the fellow begins to threaten him with a club, wanting to train Buck. At first, the dog tries to resist, but realizing he has no chance, he gives in and is taken to the place where the other dogs are waiting to be sold. There, Buck is given food and water for the first time in days, and even though he feels weak, he still manages to gather his strength to pull the hook that is holding him to the wall. Trying to find his way out, Buck breaks down the door and knocks out one of the criminals behind it, but although he manages to dodge the humans, he cannot escape as he is trapped on the deck of a ship off the coast of Alaska. When he finally arrives in Yukon, Buck begins to be guided by one of the sailors, but he stands still when he steps into the snow for the first time. At this moment, a light snowfall begins and the dog gets extremely excited, trying to bite the snowflakes, but ends up getting off his leash and runs out into the harbor. During the escape, Buck bumps into John, an elderly man who drops the harmonica that was in his pocket. As soon as he sees the instrument, Buck runs after the human to return the object, which makes John extremely grateful, because according to him, this harmonica has great sentimental value. After returning the instrument, Buck is finally found by the sailor who sells him to an old friend named Perrault, a Frenchman who wants another dog to join his pack of sleigh pullers. After buying the newest member of his team, Perrault takes the dog to camp, where his wife, Françoise, complains that he paid twice the price for Buck, but the man responds by saying that it will be worth every penny. After this, the delivery man introduces Buck to the rest of the pack who welcome him in a friendly way, but the alpha dog Spitz doesn't like him at all. With the team complete, Perrault explains that they will follow a new route to deliver the mail until they reach Dawson, but instead of listening to the plan, Buck keeps trying to get his new collar off until he falls to the ground. Before starting the trip, Perrault ties the new dog to the rest of the team to pull the sled, but because he is inexperienced, Buck is pushed and dragged through the snow while the rest of the pack fights with him. With no other option, he decides to buckle up and starts pulling the sled, but soon gets distracted by a hare and goes straight around a bend, causing everyone to fall into a ravine. After the accident, Perrault explains to Buck that they are all a pack, and that from now on, if one falls, they all go together. Moved by what the Frenchman said, the dog begins to push himself and gives his all the rest of the way, trying so hard that he runs out of energy completely. Seeing the dog's condition, Perrault decides to go camping and sets up the tent for the night with his wife, but since he is not used to the cold, Buck wakes up in the middle of the night and enters the human's tent, pushing Françoise out. Furious at waking up in the snow, the woman throws Buck out while saying that dogs should sleep outside, but as soon as he leaves the tent, he sees a giant wolf with yellow eyes, which scares him, but the animal soon disappears into the mist. The next day, Buck is still having trouble keeping up with the group, which causes him to hit a branch head-on. But still, they manage to make the deliveries and are rewarded with some fish for dinner. Only, during the meal, Spitz steals the food of one of the dogs who is left with nothing to eat, but Buck resolves the situation by giving up his own share. Still, Spitz continues with his dominant male attitude and refuses to share the water of a lake with the rest of the animals, but Buck once again solves the problem by breaking some of the ice so that everyone can drink at will. Together with the rest of the group, he learns how to be a sled puller and is soon able to keep up with the other dogs, helping to reduce travel time. In the final part of the course, they have to cross a freshly frozen lake and Françoise is tapping on the ice to make sure they can step on, but suddenly a piece of the floor breaks underneath her, knocking her into the extremely cold water. Desperate, Perrault runs to try to save his wife, but Buck is faster and jumps after the woman who is being pulled downstream. He makes her hold on while he tries to find a thinner layer of ice. Just then, Buck sees the silhouette of the black wolf and lunges full force at it, breaking the floor and finally saving Françoise. But before Perrault can pull him out of the water, the current once again pulls the dog away. As a way of returning the favor, Françoise asks her husband to save the dog, but since the man can't break the ice, Buck appears at his side and hands him a helm. As soon as he realizes that the dog is out of the water, Perrault smiles and hugs him, quite happy that everyone is okay. But from a distance, Spitz watches everything and feels challenged by Buck. Wanting to keep warm, they build a fire and Françoise talks to the dog, thanking him for everything and handing him a piece of her own food, but once again Spitz is around and thinks that the new member is trying to steal his place. After the woman goes to the tent, Buck starts running after another hare until he captures it, but after releasing it, Spitz comes out of nowhere and eliminates the helpless animal, while the rest of the gang just watches. Disgusted, Buck barks at the leader of the gang, who, feeling challenged, lunges at him and bites his throat. Despite everything, Buck has never been an aggressive dog and refuses to fight, receiving several bites from Spitz that leave him practically powerless. Buck staggers forward and tries to land one last attack, but Spitz manages to throw him away, causing him to hit a log and roll down the hill. With the challenger unconscious, the alpha dog approaches and starts sniffing to see if he is still alive, burying him in the snow afterwards. After the battle is over, the other members of the gang bow down to Spitz and begin to return to camp, but one of them does not accept being submissive and begins barking, encouraging the others to do the same. At that moment, Buck regains consciousness and sees that same wolf from before, filling himself with motivation and courage. When he sees that his challenger is up, Spitz goes all out on him, but Buck manages to dodge at the last second and bites the neck of the current alpha male, throwing him to the ground with a move. After this, the challenger puts his paw on Spitz's neck, and Spitz finally accepts defeat, giving up his position as alpha male and leaving the pack forever. The next morning, Perrault wakes up very early and starts looking for Spitz, but since deliveries can't wait, he decides to put another dog to drive, but Buck doesn't allow it, going to the leader's position and refusing to leave. After being dragged back to his place, Perrault tries to bring the other dog to take over, but since he knows he is not the alpha male, he refuses to cooperate. With no way out, the delivery man accepts that Buck is the leader and puts him in his new position, surprising everyone with his speed on the guide. Finally at peace, the pack heads full speed towards Dawson, but they are hit by a huge avalanche halfway. Although Perrault orders them to divert the route, Buck decides to follow his own instincts and runs head-on into the avalanche, in the direction of a cave. Inside the hole, the new alpha male guides the sled out while the avalanche continues after them, but finally they make it to Dawson safe and sound, and in record time. With his first delivery completed, Buck keeps watching the people and sees John again, this time inside a cabin writing a letter to his wife. The next morning, Perrault is leaving town when John runs to try to deliver his note. As soon as he sees the man, Buck stops and signals for his guardian to take the package, but when he refuses, the dog himself takes the package from his hand and hands it to Françoise. With everything ready, they head south to get more letters, but in only 8 days they are back in Dawson, a record time. Back in town, Perrault hands the envelopes to a postal employee, who says that one of the letters is for him. Upon reading the note, the man sees that it is a message from his boss telling him to sell the dogs and go back to Quebec, because from now on, this route will have a telegraph system. Even though they are shaken, the couple of humans sell the animals and say goodbye, saying that from now on Buck will be responsible for taking care of the pack. A few days later, a new explorer named Hal arrives in Dawson and buys the dogs, but when it's time to leave, the dogs can't pull the sled, and thinking it's because the animals are lazy, he threatens to beat them with a club. At this point, John appears and stops him from hurting the dogs, explaining that the sled's blades froze and that's why they weren't being able to pull. In this way, he explains that they can use the oar to release the blades, but when he realizes that Hal has no idea what he is doing, John takes the tiller and releases the sled with his bare hands. While doing the work, he asks if Hal is trying to find gold and the man confirms, but John says that they are approaching spring and because of this, the ice is melting, which makes crossing with the sled extremely dangerous for the dogs. Despite the warning, Hal thinks that John is just out to steal his gold and ignores everything he says, going on with his journey in search of wealth. But because he is completely clueless, the man gets lost off the trail and forces the dogs to drag the sled up the mountain, almost causing a horrific accident. Still, Hal still thinks he is right and starts beating the dogs with a whip to force them to pull the sled, leaving them with no other option but to continue. From his house, John sees the snow melting on the trees and decides to go after Hal, who is with his pistol trying to force the exhausted pack to continue on their way, but he manages to arrive in time to save them. Outraged, John pushes Hal in the snow while saying that the ice will melt any moment, but this makes him even more suspicious that he wants to steal his gold. With this in mind, Hal takes advantage of the fact that John is cutting Buck's bonds to grab his revolver and fires a warning shot into the air. With no one to stop him, the idiot leaves Buck passed out and goes on his way with the rest of the pack that is also badly hurt. After 2 days of being unconscious, Buck gets up and sees that the river is already thawed out, becoming extremely worried about the rest of the group, but since there is nothing he can do, he just howls at the water while John goes to the bar. Bored, Buck goes after his friend to watch him while he gets drunk, but suddenly Hal arrives on the scene and starts attacking the man, saying that the dogs have run away. Seeing John in danger, Buck lunges at the costumed explorer and tries to bite him, but Hal takes advantage of the situation to imply that he has rabies and needs to be sacrificed. At this point, Dawson's judge says that nothing will happen until all the facts are cleared up. However, in the midst of the confusion he sees that Hal threatens to draw his revolver, and manages to disarm him, driving him out of both the bar and the town. Returning home, Buck realizes that John stinks of alcohol and buries the whiskey bottle in the backyard. Wanting his drink back, the man goes after the dog and tries to get it back, but since Buck won't allow it, he decides to let off steam, revealing that his son has been gone for some time and about how it ended his marriage. After staying up all night, John takes the map of the Yukon and tells him that his son's dream was to venture into the mountains, into the parts where no one has set foot before. To realize this dream, John calls Buck to explore the outside of the map with him, just as his son always wanted. To do so, they leave in a canoe and finally begin their adventure, but after passing through several rapids, the boat breaks down and they are forced to continue their journey on foot. Meanwhile, Hal breaks into John's house with a shotgun for revenge, but the only thing he finds is the map they left behind. Following the traces that the man has drawn, Hal believes that this is the way to find the gold and decides to go after them. Meanwhile in the forest, the pair continue exploring the mountains until they find an old cabin where they decide to spend the night, but while analyzing the construction, John finds an old bottle of booze and keeps it up high, well out of Buck's reach. The next morning, John is taking a bath when he sees something shining in the water, and dives in to see what it is, and discovers that the riverbed is full of gold. In other words, the whole story about a place full of ores was real. While John searches for more nuggets, Buck sees a white wolf running through the bush and decides to follow it, but while looking for the predator, he comes face to face with a brown bear that forces him to swerve off the trail. Lost, Buck stands among the trees looking for the wolf that appears on top of a rock. Apprehensive, the wild animal calmly approaches, but the clumsy dog ends up scaring the predator that ends up running to the middle of the forest. After the wolf leaves, Buck sees the similarity in their footprints and decides to get closer so that he can form a new pack. With this goal in mind, he stands at a distance watching as the predators hunt a wild pig, but when one of them slips on the rocks and is pulled in by the current, Buck doesn't think twice and tries to help him. A few meters before a waterfall, the wolf manages to hang on to a log, and the dog alone manages to drag both the wood and the predator out of the water, proving himself worthy of joining the pack. From that moment on, Buck spends his days living with the wolves who teach him how to get his own food in the forest. While Buck hunts and brings food to the cabin, John continues to write letters to his ex-wife, telling her about his adventure and detailing the change the dog is undergoing. But at the same time, he wonders if this journey is also helping him, or if he is getting carried away by greed. Driven by this uncertainty, John takes that bottle and sits drinking on the roof of the cabin waiting for Buck to return, but when he does, he is much calmer and throws the rest of the alcohol away, thinking about how his son would like to be there. The next morning, John decides to follow Buck and discovers that he spends the day playing with the wolves in the middle of the forest. When he sees that the dog has found a home, the man decides it is time to go back to his own and throws most of the gold back into the river, keeping only enough to rebuild his life. Finally, he tells him that he has decided to go back to his wife and asks Buck to come to the cabin the next morning to say goodbye. But during the night, Hal finally finds the place and fires a shotgun blast into the lantern, setting the whole place on fire. As soon as he hears the noise, Buck desperately runs back to the cabin, But Hal is already there and gets into a dispute with John over possession of the gun. Despite being older, John manages to land a punch to Hal's face, but still, Hal manages to win the dispute and lands a shot to the man's hip while demanding his gold back. With no alternatives, John throws the nuggets to the ground while saying that no amount of gold will bring his son back, but even though he has gotten what he wants, Hal is not satisfied and prepares to eliminate him. At that moment, Buck appears on the roof of the burning cabin and jumps on top of the villain, managing to disarm him. But when Hal pulls out a club, the dog remembers the trauma he has suffered and becomes completely frightened. Without a second thought, the man prepares to deliver the final blow to the dog, but at the last second, Buck holds the club with his mouth and manages to disarm him, dragging Hal to the center of the cabin, which collapses on top of him. Buck then rushes over to John, who can only thank him before he falls to the ground, but the dog refuses to leave him alone and serves as a support to his friend, and they stay together until the end. The next morning, one of the wolves comes to comfort Buck and the two of them set off into the forest, where the dog follows as leader of the pack, guiding the pack to a life without fear where they face anyone who threatens their home. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like it and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.